Howdy, folks. We'll begin. Welcome here to another thriller. I see we have a couple hundred in this room, so only standing room only. Anyway, all right, let me introduce myself. My name is David Arietti, and I teach biology here at Oakland. I've been here for over 30 years. And anyway, my field is not only biology, but environmental science. So every year, I try to speak about the environment and how to save it and how the humans are destroying it, with some hope to give somebody some positive news when we finish today. But today, I want to talk to you about an issue that I read about a month ago, and it gave me an idea for a presentation, because this is something that most people, I'm sure, never heard of. What does climate change, child marriages, and climate change, child marriages, that should be overpopulation. I knew there was something wrong. Blame that on climate change. I blame everything on that. Yeah, that should be overpopulation. I don't know what happened. I got a little excited. Maybe it was because it was too cold out thanks to climate change. All right. Anyway, yeah, it's kind of embarrassing to have an error, but with all this technology, we make it quick. We can change it. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is, before I begin, I want to speak to you about a person who's actually an environmentalist, and we heard her name in the news lately, and for sad reasons, but I found out after doing research that she's really a good environmentalist, and I'll explain her first. And when I explain who she is and what she has done, you will know why her name was in the news and what that has to do with the environment. But anyway, before I get to that, I want to show you the outline that I'm going to cover. It's called, I'm going to speak about the population clock, the effects of climate change, what is childhood marriage, where does it occur, why does it occur, and then overpopulation in general, okay? So, before I begin, I want to speak to you about a certain individual. This is the woman. I'm not going to tell you her name until I'm finished talking about her. I don't think anybody knows who she is. But her name was in the news recently, and before I tell you who she is, I'm going to tell you what she has done. She was born in April 1890, and she lived to be 108. She was a writer. She wanted women's suffrage and worked for civil rights movement. She was a charter member of the American Civil Liberties Union. In 1993, President Clinton awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And in 1999, she was inducted into the National Wildlife Federation Hall of Fame. And in 2000, she was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame. She wrote a book called Everglades Conservation. Well, her main work was in Everglades Conservation, and the book she wrote was called Everglades Rivers of Glass. Does anybody know who she is? Well, you'll find out now. Let me get a little fancy footwork here. She wrote that book, and they named a school after her. The school they named after her was the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas School in Florida. So it was just coincidence that I ran across her name, and I wanted to do research. So I didn't realize who she was until I did research, and now everybody in this room knows she was helpful in keeping the Everglades intact. And actually the school, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas School, we heard about that because of the horrific shooting which occurred on Valentine's Day. And it just so happens that I went to high school with a friend named Randy Swiller, and he was the co-author of my book, Prognosis Disaster, of which I have a couple copies here if anyone wants to see them. And he lived in Coral Springs, Florida, so about 15 years ago, he sent his 3 kids to that school, because he lives near there. So I just thought I'd mention that. So there is somewhat of a connection with me, and I just thought that I'd mention her. So now you all know who she is. You keep hearing the name, and most people don't know that she was instrumental in preserving the Everglades. And she lived to be 108, so evidently she was doing something right. Okay. Anyway, just thought I'd mention that first. So, what I want to do, though, is talk to you about the main topic today, and that's climate change creating generations of child marriages. Now, what exactly is a child marriage? Okay, let me show you this, where this comes from. I was reading this article, and let's see, where is it? Oh. There it is. It was this article that I got. It says, why climate change is creating a new generation of child brides. So I figured, well, this is a good topic to talk about because I'm sure most people never even thought of this idea. And unfortunately, the answer is obvious. But before I do that, I want to show you a little movie on this. But before I do that, I want to talk to you about population, and you're going to see how they're all related. So what I have here a clock. I'm going to show you that clock. And I'm going to set a timer for an hour, if I get this there. Okay. This is called the World Population Clock. And what I am going to do is set this for an hour, and we're going to see how many people have been added to the planet during this lecture. Okay? So I'm setting this, I'm putting on the timer, I'm setting it for 1 hour. That's 1 hour, 0 minutes, and then it will go off. And we're going to do this with the population. What I'm going to do is I'm going to write down the population. I hope I have some liquid chalk here. Ready to start. Okay. Well, we don't have any chalk here. So, oh, yes, we do. Okay, so I am going to write down there 7, 4, 6, 7, 1, 9, 5, let's say 8, 8, 0, something like this. It doesn't really matter, give or take, okay? And then what I'm going to do at the end of the hour when that rings, we're going to subtract and see how many people have been added at the present time. Now there are a number of these population clocks online. Of course, I don't think anyone is 100% accurate, but it's pretty close. So we're going to go with this number. At the present time, as I speak, there's roughly 7.467 billion people on the planet. And by the time, in an hour, we'll see how many have been added. And this does have something to do with today's lecture, and I'll go into that in a moment. Now, here I have a chart of problems associated with climate change. And there's a whole bunch of them. This comes from my book. It's a chart, and I'm not trying to push my book, but I just mentioned this is a chart from the book. And one of the things that are not mentioned here, problems associated with climate change, is child marriages. And that will come under this category of a threat magnifier. A threat magnifier is something that makes a bad situation worse. Now, I know I'm keeping you in suspense, that you want to know why does that happen? Why do we have childhood marriages, and why does that have to do with climate change? Well, I'll go into that in a minute. But first, let's explain what childhood marriage is. Childhood marriage is any formal marriage or informal union where one or both parties is under 18. Okay, so if a girl is 17, it's considered a childhood marriage. Now, I also have a chart about how many are getting married at 18 and all this. And here it says, every minute, nearly 1 every 2 seconds under the age of 18. That is 23 girls every minute in the world are getting married. And this, of course, has severe consequences. So what I have done, I'm going to show you first the countries where it occurs. Well, by the way, this is an article, too, that tells you that 7.5 million illegal child marriages take place globally each year, where 1 in 3 girls in the developing world is affected by the practice. So we're talking about the poorer countries in the world, and this unfortunately makes the situation worse, as we're going to find out near the end of the lecture. Where does childhood marriage occur? Here we see most of these countries, if not all, are in, anybody know what continent that is? Africa, every single one, starting with Niger, Central African Republic, Chad, well, except Bangladesh. Bangladesh, of course, takes place near India, but unfortunately they have a high childhood marriage rate. I think you can all see that. And let's get some facts. There will be 1.2 billion childhood marriages by the year 2050. 1 in 5 girls in the world are said to be married before the age of 18. That's roughly 650 million. And over 650 million alive today were married as children. Isn't that cool? That's something. Now, what are the reasons for childhood marriage? Well, we have tradition. Okay? For some reason, generations want to do that. Poverty. Poverty is acute. Insecurity, their safety is in doubt from sexual assault, conflict. Gender inequality, I'm sure we've heard of that, and this is a big problem. I write about that too in one of my other books, how that's actually a cause for environmental pollution. And if anybody wants more information on that, see me, or we can look at my books. By the way, my books are in the library here. They have one of each in this campus and the other campus. Now, the reason why I'm here today is to tell you about climate change as a source of childhood marriage. Okay? And what I want to do is, I want to play for you a movie, a quick one. I got that set up already for you to avoid. Let me see. Yeah, that's it. And this will explain what's going on. Hold on, I'm going to begin with this and blow this up. There we go. This is one way of blowing up stuff without dynamite. Read this. I think you'd enjoy it. This gives you some idea. Got this from a magazine article online, of course, and specifically. They'll go into more detail. Pretty cool music, huh? So I doubt anybody in this room has heard about this issue. Am I correct? Anybody ever hear of it? Right. So this is what I'm trying to bring to your attention. So what's the main issue? How come we have so many child marriages? The answer, unfortunately, boils down to money. And what's the problem? I'll show you. Let me just get back to here. Start all over. Okay. What it means is, essentially, you have poverty, okay? Let's say you have a big family. Now, in countries like Africa and India, countries in Africa and India, these people have a lot of children. And as usual, girls are not considered as valuable as men. So what's the obvious? Well, if you don't make enough money to feed your family, what do? You try to get rid of your daughters, marry them off to some guy who'll take them, so that'll be out of your hair. You understand? And this is unfortunate. And now, to even make matters worse, a lot of these young girls get pregnant, which makes the situation worse because then there's more people to feed and the cycle just goes on and on and on. See what I'm saying? So we have a population problem here on the planet. Actually, I like to call it a being problem. And everybody say, well, what the hell is a being problem? The answer is human being. You can thank Red Fox for that one. All right. Anyway, now, what is the impact? Okay, well, it's obvious. Now, I don't want to read everything, but I do have some stories about individual women in various parts of Africa that I want to share with you because I feel this is important, okay? As I mentioned, every minute we have 23 girls married off too soon, and this is a big problem. And now, if you are poor, you know, the obvious thing is to limit the size of your family, so you find some guy who will marry your daughter, okay? And evidently, they do find people, many are older than the child, and of course some are a little older. But anyway, this causes a problem. Now, child brides have huge challenges of being married as children, okay? First of all, they lack freedom, and they are deprived of fundamental rights, such as health. Now, I teach environmental science at Columbia College of Missouri. They have 4 campuses in Crystal Lake, Crystal Lake, Elgin, Freeport, and Gurnee. I teach about 4 out of the 6 classes a year at that school, and I teach environmental science, and we do cover issues such as this in class. And we talk about especially population and how women are being affected because of female, women are not as valued as much as men. It's called gender inequality, and unfortunately it's the girls that are being punished. And so anyway, when they get married, they really don't have much say in anything, especially in fact when it comes to education. Boys are the first ones to get educated. If the parents don't have money to send their girls to school, we're talking about grade school, they'll just send the boys and leave the girls at home, and the girls will be stuck, they'll be socialized in such an area that they have to work in the house, clean the floors, do the dishes, stuff like this, instead of getting an education. And when the boys are free, we see that the boys are just playing around games while the girls are working around the house. So it's unfortunate that this is a world crisis. By the way, I know some of you are going to ask, are there child marriages in the United States? And unfortunately, the answer is yes. We do have that too. And we actually have some statistics, but I'm not really going to talk about that now because I'm mainly talking about these issues, okay? So, we do have impacts. Now, what I'm going to do is give you some examples of these, and this will actually show you more of the impact of this problem. Now, what I'm going to do is talk about 3 major countries in Africa, and what I have done for each country, I've put the whole map of Africa, and I'm showing you where the country is located on the map. So here we see Malawi, and if you see the arrow, that's where it is, sort of on the east coast. There, Madagascar, and that's Malawi up there. And I'll be talking first about that issue, and I'll give you some examples. And I just want to read this. Normally you shouldn't read PowerPoints. You should get to the point, but I want to do it this way to impress upon you what's going on there. Like I say, I have 3 stories, and then after this I'll talk to you about overpopulation and some of their problems. Okay, I want to talk to you first about this girl. She's from Malawi. Her name is Tonya Sands. And as a teenager, I'll just read this to you. First year as a teenager would also be the first year for married life. Up to the moment the water swept away her parents' field in Kakasho in the Nasanji district of Malawi, they had been scraping a living. Afterwards, they were reduced to scavenging for bits of food, to firewood to sell. So you see, floods. These issues, floods, too much rain, forest fires, all these things eventually hit these families. And when you're already poor, it makes the situation a lot worse. Remember in the beginning I showed you a list of events that occur due to climate change, and one of them is a threat magnifier. This unfortunately includes many issues. It just makes a bad situation worse. And unfortunately we see the same thing here. Let me give you an example. I'll just mention this briefly. As you all know, in the summertime we had a lot of forest fires in California. Okay, what do the trees do for the soil? Well, the trees keep the soil together. That's why you have roots. The roots protect the soil. Okay, so then the fires were out. What happened there? Then they got floods. What did the floods do? The floods caused the mudslides, you see, because we took away the roots, which stabilize the soil, which means it holds it together. So when you have all this rain, you get mudslides. So one thing after another, ripple effects, you see? And so, unfortunately now, not only do we have floods and environmental issues as ripple effects, but we have these social issues, such as families wanting to get rid of their children, just marry them off, and that just makes more problems. But, it's just ripple, one after another. It's like a spiraling marriage, getting out of control. Just gets worse and worse and worse. Okay, so let's go back to Tonya here. So, when a young man came to their door and asked for the 13-year-old's hand, 13 folks, the couple didn't think about it for too long, lest he look elsewhere. Tonya begged them to change their minds. She was too young. She pleaded. She didn't want to leave, but it was no avail. Her parents sat her down and spelled out for her. The weather had changed and had taken everything from them. There was not enough food to go around. They couldn't afford another mouse to feed. Now, I want to mention something that's sort of related to this. I had a student at one of my classes at Columbia. Her daughter reached puberty at the age of 8. Now, why was that? Well, this is another problem with the environment. And I don't know if this is going to affect marriages, but the reason why she reached puberty at the age of 8, because we're eating a lot of food, especially fruits and vegetables, and they have residues of pesticides on them. These pesticides, when they break down, they act as estrogenic substances. Therefore, they act as the hormones in the human body. So what they do is, in the process of breaking down, they mimic estrogen. Therefore, these are called hormone mimics. Now, I did not make this up. So this is why young girls now, I'm sure you may have heard of it, are reaching puberty earlier. And this is all because of the environment and pesticides. So I also did a lot of work with pesticides, but I just wanted to mention it because we know this 13-year-old girl, obviously I don't think, she was just reaching puberty, but in many cases they reach it earlier, and that just gave me the idea to throw that out at you. There's a lot with the environment that's going on that is not too well known, but in the field we do a lot of, we hear about this. Now anyway, let me talk here where we see around 1.5 million girls in Malawi are at risk for getting married because of climate change. That's a tremendous number. Little girls fetch water. Here we see a village. These girls are fetching water in the district of Malawi, where Tonya's from, and extreme poverty in the region may compel them to marry before they're ready. Okay? Now let me talk to you about Lucy. Lucy Anusa is 15 years old, and was married at 14. She gave birth to a daughter earlier this year, but has been abandoned by her husband. Nice guy, right? So, again, this is another problem. So you marry off the girls, then what happens? They get pregnant, and guess what? The girl probably has to go back to the family again, where she got sort of dumped because the husband left. So in this case, she has a baby. What does that mean? It's making the situation worse. You see it? So again, these are all ripple effects. Now, I'm sorry I'm telling you all these things. I know it's bad news. It makes you sad. It makes me sad. But at least if you know the problem, I don't know what we can do about it, but at least we're aware of it. And maybe talk about that later on, how we can solve this problem. Anyway, now let me continue. The youngest of 3 sisters, she now lives with her parents, you see, in Maka, near the southern end of Malawi. So again, she moved in with her parents. Now they have an extra mouth to feed. Kind of ironic, isn't it? You want to get rid of one, you have 2. So it's really sad. So it says here, my parents are poor. They couldn't even afford to support me while I was going to school. I was lagging in the payment of school fees, couldn't buy my exercise books or pens or soap and other necessities. So actually, this reminds me of something, as Maggie knows up there. I try to collect pens and stuff and try to send them away, which I should do, to these poor countries, you know, and I'm sure everybody has extra pens and stuff. Maybe that's one solution, you know. Just send them to Africa, find a country, or go to the embassy or the consulates and ask them if they need supplies. You know, obviously, when you have a few hundred pens, you're not going to use all those pens, you know. All right. Now, by the way, that reminds me. What do you have when you have a pig and a pen? Anybody know? The answer is pen and oink. Just thought that's talking about pens. I just had to get that in there. All right. Anyway, okay. So anyway, here it says the school was asking for a school development fund, meaning that every child had to pay 250 kwaches. I have no idea how much that's worth, but I doubt it's a lot of money. My parents couldn't even afford that. Okay. Evidently that's the money, so I have no idea. We can check it out. Okay, let's go on to Mozambique, which if you notice, it's more or less in the same area. It's a little bit west of Madagascar there, see it? Okay, and Mozambique. I figured I'd show you both just so you get some idea. Let's talk about Philomena Antonio. She is 19. Her 27-year-old husband, let's call him Momaid, offered her father, all right, 2,000, whatever Mozambique, whatever the money is, okay? Let's say dollars for the hell of it. Mozambique dollars. To marry her when she was 15. She has 10 brothers and 2 sisters. So that means the family has 13 kids in the family, right? She has 10 brothers and 2 sisters, okay? Which, of course, to me, is quite a bit. I myself believe, I don't want to offend anybody, nobody should have 2. more than 2 because the planet can't afford it. You understand? Even if you're a trillionaire, you shouldn't have more than 2, and that's my feeling, but I'm doing that to save the planet, not because I'm mean and I don't like people. All right. So, anyway, let's talk about her. We met here. It says, my name is Tonya. I'm 19 years old. I married Chiruti when I was 15. Okay. We met here in the neighborhood, and he asked me to be with him. He didn't want us to be lovers. He wanted to marry me. I told him he had to come and talk to my father. My father accepted because he had poor conditions. So he believed that my husband could support me to go to school. I accepted because my father allowed me to. Since my father is poor, I thought I would get married so that my husband would help me. I liked him. I thought he was a beautiful man. I remember that before my father used to fish a lot. But suddenly, guess what? There's not enough fish. Okay? Why? Because, and poverty increased. There's not enough fish because the climate has changed. Now, if it gets hot, okay, let me tell you something. My field's marine science, okay? When you heat up the water, guess what? You have less oxygen. The colder the water, the more gas can be absorbed. So, it doesn't matter what gas, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, oxygen, whatever. So the colder the water, the more oxygen. Fish need at least 5 parts per million oxygen to survive. When you get below that, you're really stressing them out and they may not survive, okay? Everybody knows you need oxygen to live. Well, at least most organisms do. We did find some organisms, other ones that maybe I'll talk about later that have a different type of lifestyle. They live without oxygen, but I'm here to talk about oxygenated species. So when you heat up the water, you lose oxygen. Also, being in Africa, I don't think they really take good care of their water supply, so it probably gets polluted by sedimentation or something like this, and then of course the fish can't survive, and that's another reason why there's not enough fish to feed the family. Now, when he used to fish well, he used to buy a 50-kilogram bag of maize, which is corn. But with his struggling, it was just 1 kilo here, 1 kilo there. So 1 kilo is 1/50th of 50 kilograms, you see? So what happened was they didn't have enough money to even buy enough food. And of course, corn is not exactly a very expensive item, but when you don't have enough money, it could be something with sticker shock. So now, let me continue. I remember that when the production started to decrease, I asked my father for money to go to school, but he couldn't give me any. Okay? I believe that if my father had kept doing well with the fishing, he wouldn't have accepted the proposal, because then he could afford my education, my school fees, and my books. That's her father. Fisherman Antonio Momaide Jamal, 50, has, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. In the province, in Nampula province on the east coast of Mozambique, all his life. He started fishing in 1985. He had hoped to keep his daughter Philomena in school, but when catches started to fall, he could no longer support her. He accepted, $33, okay, that's good. $33 to marry her off at the age of just 15, on the understanding that her husband, Momaid, who was 21 at the time, continues to support her through school. You got to admit, that's pretty admirable, right? He had a good attitude, because you want to get your children educated. Boys, girls, they all should be educated. All right. So now, here's another girl I want to talk to you about. And her name is Fatima Musa, 16, 9 months pregnant. She is the oldest of 7 children, 6 of them girls. She lives in Nataka, in the district of Larde, near the coast in eastern Mozambique. She married 18-year-old Priorina Manuel Antonio when she was 15. He had offered her father, again, $33, the high levels of, wait, that's a different thing, yeah. The high levels of poverty in the district meant there was no party or gifts for the young couple. All right. Now, Mozambique, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Mozambique. It's one of the poorest countries in the world, with almost 70% of its 28 million people living below the poverty line. It is particularly vulnerable to climate change. Okay? The legal age of marriage is 18, 16 with parental consent, but still Mozambique has one of the highest rates of child marriages in the world, with nearly 1 in 2 girls married by the age of 18, and 1 in 7 by 50. The highest rates of child marriages are found in the northern province. Okay? Now, Fatima Musa, 16, we just mentioned that. My father said I would never have considered allowing my daughter to marry now because she is young, but she will marry because I don't have enough money to send her to secondary school. I didn't want to get married at such a young age, but I didn't know what to do since I couldn't go to school. So I saw the opportunity to marry someone who could maybe improve my life a little bit. Now, there is something hidden in all these issues. What is the issues? We suffer here in the United States too. It all boils down to money, okay? Now, in my books, and again, I wrote 2, I'm not trying to push them, but if anybody wants them, you know, we have a special sale, 2 for the price of 10, nothing like a little extortion there. I mentioned, especially in the latter book called Prognosis Disaster, how's that for an optimistic title, that we got to get rid of money because we're destroying the planet. And this is one example. Everything depends on money. You understand? Even here in America, and what the government talks about, taxes, raise taxes, lower taxes, everything's money. This is too expensive because we can't help the people because it's too expensive. You know, things like this. Now it's what's going on in Kentucky with the strike, the teacher strikes. You know, they deserve to have a living too. But anyway, everything boils down to money. So, what I am proposing, and I'm still going to go on with this, we have to do something to get rid of money and do something else which is more equitable to everyone else. Now, I just really didn't think about speaking about that or just going off on a tangent, but this is one of my issues. I've been discussing this with a lot of people, and I don't know how to do it. That's the problem. But I figure if we can send a spaceship to Pluto, 9 years it took, and we knew exactly when it would get there, and take beautiful pictures of Pluto, you know, that's the last planet that we know of, we can do something about money. Does that make sense in a way? We have to do it. And what do poor people do? Now poor people, especially in a capitalistic society, are not worth very much. It's only the money that are actually considered for basically anything. So I know I'm very opinionated and a little sarcastic, but you know, that's the way I am. Okay, anyway, let's go on to South Sudan now. I want to tell you about Sudan. This is the newest country in Africa. It was made in 2011, and we would have hoped that, by the way, that's the 54th country, I believe, now in Africa, 54th sovereign nation. I don't know if you've been following the news, but you know, Sudan, before they made South Sudan, they were having a war for, who knows, over 50 years. You know, it wasn't really spoken about much in the media, but nevertheless, they were having a war, and these countries, for some reason, most countries, or many countries in Africa, are at war with themselves. Now, in my book, I mentioned that also. Many countries in Africa, they're at war with themselves, and when they're at war with themselves, it's the people who suffer, mainly the civilians. They destroy the cropland, and they do all sorts of things, which just makes a bad situation worse. And I did come up with some solutions how we can end the warfare in my book, but like I say, I'm not here to discuss that. I just want to tell you how climate change. Anyway, South Sudan is the newest country. Let me just give you some information on it. Became the world's newest country in 2011, but within 2 years, fighting had broken out between the Dinka, loyal to President Salva Kiir, and members of the Nuer tribe, supporting former Vice President Riek Machar. You see, that's a shame. Here they have a brand new country, and almost immediately just start shooting each other. Of course, that doesn't make the situation any better if you're poor. A combination of violence and drought, that's all they needed, devastated last year's harvest, creating food shortages that have left 100,000 people facing famine and another 1 million at risk. Okay? So what's the situation? Well, the fact they have drought means that climate change is exacerbating the situation. And what else is happening is the fact that the wars, the internal conflicts don't help either. All right. Now, there is political conflict, ethnic conflict, and cattle raiding. What is cattle raiding? Well, that's the problem. A lot of these people raise cattle for food, just like the rustlers in the old Western movies. You know, they steal cattle and horses, whatever. So that's a problem in this country. They steal cattle to get money for food and things like this, which of course exacerbates the problem. Anyway, there's a link between conflict and poverty. Yeah, what else is new? People want to get rich by raiding cattle. If someone gets more cattle, they can get more wives and more children, and the clan will be bigger and stronger. So here you see, that's their mentality. Let's get more wives, which means more children, which means more stress on the environment, less food, you see. Now, I tell you the way it is. I tell you, this is my field. I've been doing this for years. And like I say, I just tell it the way I see it. And I think when you read the newspaper and these articles, people don't really go into it and see what's in between the lines. You understand what I'm saying? I just tell it the way it is. Now, I'm not always right, but as I tell my class, I'm always David. So they think. Now, because of the fighting, people can't be sure that their cattle are safe, so they think it's better to pass them on to their marriage. Okay? And that reminds me of something called the dowry, where, you know, in India they have a dowry where the parents of the wife have to give the so-called goodies to the husband's family, when they don't realize the goodies they're getting their daughter, but they think the other goodies are cattle, money, you know, clothes, whatever, jewelry. Anyway, let's get back here to South Sudan. So South Sudan's battle for cattle is forcing schoolgirls to become teenage brides, okay? Conflict and desperate hunger are driving families to marry off their daughters to secure precious cows, despite the girls having to forfeit their education. By the way, this reminds me, let's put a little levity here. Someone asked me, he said, hey, Ariette, you know why cows have bells? He didn't know. I told him, because their horns don't work. All right, anyway. All right. Cows are everything in South Sudan. If a man is to marry, his family must have cattle to pay the bride's family. But as security has deteriorated, cattle raiding has increased, and families who have lost their livestock have been unable to marry off sons they are struggling to feed. Searching for a solution, many have turned to younger daughters as a means to acquire cattle. So you marry somebody and then you acquire cattle. So anyway, last time I got food, armed men took everything. See? So famine in South Sudan is a problem. Okay, let's talk about this other young lady, Rebecca Armuck. She's 16. Thank you. Hi, Akash.
Hey, sorry we're late.
Hey, don't worry about it. Thank you for coming. Okay. So anyway, Rebecca Armuck, 16, here carrying her 7-month-old daughter. Yar, her name, Yar wanted to be, okay. Anyway, Yar wanted to become a doctor before she was told to marry her father. Anyway, all right, so anyway, these are just some issues that I wanted to talk to you about in relation to climate change and why we have childhood marriage. Now, I'm sure nobody in this room even thought about this issue before I brought it to your attention. Now what I want to do is talk to you about overpopulation. Let's see what time it is. We have 28 minutes before the alarm goes off. Okay. So now I want to talk to you about overpopulation. I want to point out something. Many of you think that population is a woman's problem. It's actually a man's problem. How do I know? Well, it's in the name. The name is population. You can't have population unless you have a pop. Which is one of my fans. So anyway, so now we know. It's true. Okay. Anyway, so before I go into that, I want to give you some examples. Thank you. I'm glad he came. All right. Now, I want to talk to you about this problem. Since this is my second issue, whenever we talk environmental science in my class, after we talk about ecology and things like this, first section, I talk about the population problem. Now, one of the issues that, since we're dealing with population and climate change and child marriages, I want to mention this term called carrying capacity. What that means is the maximum population an area could sustain without bringing in outside resources. Okay, and what I have done, I've shown you a good example of that, is the space shuttle. Why the space shuttle? Okay, very good. Because, I'm going to refer this back to the planet Earth, but let's start with the space shuttle. The space shuttle can hold about 7 people for a maximum of about 2 weeks. Why? Because they build up with carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide builds up. You have to worry about oxygen. You can't just stop off at the nearest asteroid 7-Eleven, pick up a bottle of oxygen, right? Anyway, so you see the point. So they're stuck on board. So you have 2 weeks. You can hold about 7 people for 2 weeks orbiting the Earth. Then what do? Well, you have to start limiting. What are you going to do? The main thing you all need is oxygen. Remember, you're limited with the amount of oxygen. You can live probably without food for a couple months, and water probably around 3 days. But so if we would now apply that to the planet Earth, the question is, how many people can the Earth sustain? And the highest estimate I've seen in my research is about 9 billion people, which is about 1.5 more billion people that we have now. Because once we exceed that, we are going to be in trouble, you see? So we have to worry about the population. And when we have all these issues that deal with population, such as these child marriages, we're in deep trouble. And I do come up with some ideas that maybe we can discuss after I finish my talk. Okay, here it is, overpopulation. The word pop is highlighted. All right. Now, what are some of the problems associated? Well, almost everything is associated with it. We have lack of water, depletion of natural resources, all forms of pollution, climate change, of course, deforestation and desertification, extinction, factory farming, and low expectancy in countries with fastest growing populations. By the way, I just want to point out that tomorrow, Wednesday, I'll be speaking at the Des Plaines campus at 3 o'clock, and the title of that lecture is How Biodiversity Inoculates Against Extinction. So that happens to deal with extinction up there, okay? And what biodiversity means, just to get off on our side, the wide variety of organisms, because we need bacteria, we need fungus, and we need, of course, plants and other animals to keep us, to keep the life support here on the planet. You understand? And I'm going to explain how the biodiversity, the tremendous number of all these organisms, help prevent extinction, and actually they keep us going because everybody's breathing here, and one of the main organisms that help us breathe, believe it or not, are bacteria, because first of all they fix the nitrogen, which helps the plants grow, and of course the plants give us oxygen, you see, and that includes not only on land but in the ocean and aquatic environments. Anyway, so let's get back here. So again, I'm trying to relate that these young girls, when they get pregnant, and by the way, here we see, actually I put this in the back of all my slides, this young girl with a baby. I don't know how old she is, but she's probably under 15, and she already has a baby, and she's a young mother, which of course is no good for her or the baby, probably. Anyway, so when we have all these people depleting the natural resources, especially when we have, like I mentioned before, where we had that young girl who got married, had a baby, then her husband left her, so what happened was the family has an extra mouth to feed, you see? So this adds to all these problems, and it seems like it's never ending until we have some common sense approaches, and maybe, like I said, we can discuss them. So anyway, these are the main issues that we have to worry about. Lack of water. Now, I just want to go over these real quick. Everybody in this room, I'm sure when you get up in the morning, you just go a couple feet to a sink or somewhere, turn on the faucet, and voila, you have unpolluted water. But what do these people in these poor countries do, such as Mozambique, Malawi, that I mentioned before, and South Sudan? Well, many of them don't have water. They have to walk a few miles a day to find a little lake or pond or whatever with polluted water just to bring back for their families. So this is a problem. And here we take for granted. That's one thing. And then, depletion of natural resources. When these countries, how do they cook? Well, a lot of them cook with wood. And when they cook with wood, that means they got to chop down the trees, make charcoal, and that just adds to deforestation. And anyway, then we have pollution. Take Nigeria, for instance. The Shell Oil company has really caused a lot of pollution in Nigeria because, unfortunately, they have a lot of oil. A lot of that oil gets spilled, and a lot of Nigeria, which, by the way, is the largest country in Africa, they say 1 out of every 5 Africans is a Nigerian. That's obviously no good either. And then we have climate change, and then of course, like I say, this just makes droughts and makes growing crops a lot more harder, and it's tougher to feed the families, and then you have warfare, and one thing leads to another. And the fact is, everything I'm telling you, we know about these issues, but we just don't seem to be doing anything about it, and I'm sure you agree, right? One of the things we have to do is, since we know about it, we have to really do something about it, instead of worrying about these non-issues, such as love lives of politicians, football players, and all this other stuff. Okay, then of course we have extinction of organisms, which can actually degrade the environment, that I'll speak about tomorrow. And then we have factory farming. This is another issue which is very bad. Essentially, factory farming means raising animals such as pigs and cows and chickens and all this in enclosed areas, and of course it's not healthy for both the environment and of course for the organisms themselves, because when you have too many pigs and cows in one area, there's too much pollution from too many animals in an enclosed area, and obviously it could make them sick, and then it's all about greed. So factory farming is another issue that I would like to talk about, but not now. Oh, by the way, there's another term for factory farming. Anybody know what that word? It's called a CAFO. Anyone ever hear of that? That stands for Concentrated Animal Feeding Operations. That's when you have hundreds or even thousands of animals in one area, okay? In fact, I have a book out, a coffee table, I didn't write it, I bought it, a coffee table book called CAFOs, and you see chickens and cows, how they're farmed, you know, they're all pressed together, and of course that's no good either. And chicken, this is why if you want to buy eggs or chicken, get the free-range chicken and eggs. And it tastes better too, because the chickens are not stressed, and you can sell them. And then of course, just another word, if you want to buy meat, get the grass-fed cow. Even though it costs a lot more, it's a lot healthier for you and the cow itself, because they don't have to use as many drugs to make them grow quicker. But that's another story. Okay, now, also, we have low life expectancy when we have these large populations. I want to show you a chart that I have from my environmental class. If you look at this, this is a typical chart that we have. They're called population pyramids. The one on the left is typical of Africa. The one on the right is a developed country like Denmark, Norway, Sweden, country like this. Let me explain what this is about. These population pyramids are designed in such a way to show you how many people are roughly alive at certain ages. If we see here, and by the way, this every 4 years, this goes from 0 to 4, 5 to 9, 10 to 14, etc. If we look at a developing country, which is unfortunately many in Africa now, and what's happening? As you notice, we have a lot of children, but many children don't survive. Okay? So this is another problem that these people don't even think of when they have these childhood marriages. They're increasing the populations, but unfortunately the kids don't live very long. See that? Notice how they're dying off at, let's say, how many kids at 15? We have a lot, we have fewer than when they were between 0 and 4, almost. See how it levels off? Whereas in the developing countries, we see people living well into their 80s, and we have roughly the same amount in each age group, you see, which is pretty good. And by the way, this is divided into male and female. I don't know how accurate it is, but it can't be that bad. It's pretty accurate. So this is a population curve. And what this shows you is, that I wanted to point out, is that like in Africa and maybe certain areas in India, you have a lot of children, but many of them die. And of course, that is obviously not good for the children or the parents. And you know, it's just associated with a lot of grief that we, being a few thousand miles away, we don't even hear about it. As they say, out of sight, out of mind. So anyway, so this is the situation here with child marriages and overpopulation. Now, are there any questions? And then we'll see how we're coming on with the timer. We'll see how much the Earth has increased in a few minutes. Any questions, comments, anything? Yes, sir. Yeah, Jim.
Yeah, you mentioned that Pluto was a planet. It's not a planet.
A planetoid?
Yes, they decided it's not a planet anymore.
What do you call it?
The dwarf planet.
Dwarf.
Yeah.
I don't want to insult Pluto there. Let's take a look. You see the pictures? Now, I'm glad you mentioned that, Jay. By the way, there's Jay, a friend of mine. Let me look at Pluto. I'm going to show you something there. Let's see. There it is. See? And this was taken with, these are real beautiful pictures. See the clarity? Now, here's the point. It's a beautiful, if we can do that, don't you think maybe we can solve some of the local problems here on the planet, on this planet? So this just shows you the technology we have. Why not use it here? You see? And we can solve some of these issues, like with climate change. Here's the issue. We know what causes climate change. Obviously, too many cars spewing out gasoline. Now, I am proud of myself for one thing. I myself, even though I bought an Echo, and that's a car, that they don't make them anymore. They stopped in '05. I got 40-something miles a gallon. And by the way, that's why I repeat myself sometimes, because I drive an Echo. Just thought I'd mention it. Anyway, now, don't forget to be there tomorrow. Anyway, I have now a Nissan Leaf, a used one. I spew out more carbon dioxide than that does. It spews out 0. And that's what we should all be doing. Now, see, we have the technology. We had this technology years ago. As a matter of fact, I'm going to tell you something. The late 1890s, that's right, in the 1890s, guess what? Electric cars existed. If you read the literature, right, Paul? I believe you read. Yeah, right? Oh, you know that. Yeah, it did. Electric cars existed. So why did we get rid of them? Well, because of greed and the oil barons. Okay? Los Angeles, I think in the 1930s, they had a wonderful mass transit system, trolley cars and buses or whatever have you. And then they took it away because they wanted everybody to have their own cars. Now, even in Chicago, down by 16th Street, I actually was there doing an asbestos job, and I saw remnants of trolley car tracks. I don't know if anybody remember. They used to have them here in Chicago, and then they took them out. And that was the stupidest thing to do, because we have mass transit, trolley cars, which I think are great. They're electric because they have the lines up there, and other countries have them too, such as Holland. And I've been to some of these countries, and man, I love their mass transit. And of course, I'm from New York City, by the way, and we have the subways. We have a good system. It goes 24 hours a day, and it's not bad. I think we have something like 429 stations, which means it's quite a big system, and it works. I like the subway. So the fact we have all these issues, well, we have the solutions, we just don't want to do it. And by the way, I want to point out about Oakton, they did something special. Over at the main campus, they put in a level 2 charger for cars like I have, for my Nissan Leaf. Now, well, what's the difference? I just want to tell you, since we're on the subject, real briefly. There are 3 types of chargers, a level 1, 2, and 3. A level 1 is the one I have at home. I just plug it into the garage socket, just like what's there. I plug it in, and then plug the other end into the car. That's a little different plug that fits into the car. That's all I need. Just to let you know, my electric bill does not go up more than $20 a month, and I plug it in every night. So what do you say about that? So that means it's relatively inexpensive. So, and the level 2 charger is the one that Oakton got. They have 2 chargers over by the new science building called the Margaret Berkeley building. That's the new science building. There are 2 of them there, and when we plug it in, it's all free, by the way, just to let you know. So whenever I get there, I hope no one's using it, I plug it in. However, sometimes what kind of makes me a little upset, I see a car that's not electric, he's not using it, he's just parking there. He's not supposed to park there. And so I mentioned this to the police there. He said, well, he heard about that, they're going to start giving tickets. You should not do that. And by the way, at the City Hall here in Skokie, they have 2 sets of chargers. One set which has 2 for the government vehicles and another for vehicles like mine, and they're all free. For this one, it's ChargePoint. ChargePoint, you need a special card. With the other ones, you don't. So anyway, so we have the technology, we're just not using it right. Okay? I just thought I'd mention that, and that kind of annoys me, but what can I do? Just raise hell. Okay, so I think I covered everything. Anyone else want to say something else? And then if we don't, what we'll do is we'll go now and we'll check how many people have been added, okay? Since we have a few minutes left. So I will, let's see, it's 11:50. So we'll say 50 minutes. So let me go back to the chart here. There it is. Okay, so we began this 50 minutes ago, so we'll figure it out 50 minutes instead of an hour. What do we got? 7, 4, 6, 7, 2, 0, 3, and we got 057 for now. Okay, now let's subtract. By the way, I call this liquid chalk. What happens is, let me tell you why I do that. Because some people leave it out this, they leave the top off and it dries. Here's another problem. Well, we'll get to Reese. What's the problem? The problem is it dries, and what do you do with it? You throw it out. Here's the problem. Does it decompose? No. It'll probably never decompose. That's why I'm against this. However, we do have now these smart boards where we have it computerized. I can, in theory, write with my finger on these whiteboards. You ever seen that? We have one here down in one of these rooms in the C wing. I used to write with my finger, and then we can change the colors and everything. It's a lot easier than this. Plus, if you have something called environmental illness, which I have spoken about, that's another issue, you get headaches and all from smelling the ink. All right, anyway, let's calculate this. Now, just to show my classes, I don't like to use calculators unless I have to, okay? Oh, by the way, that reminds me, as I mentioned, we have all these bacteria and things. Do you know why bacteria are smarter than politicians in Washington? Why? Because they can multiply and divide without a calculator. He's one of my fans. Okay, now, so what we're going to do is, what do we got? 9, 6, let's see if I did this right. 7, what do we got? 15. 15, let's see if I might have one. 19, 12, 7, 0. Oh, so that's about right. We have about 7. Did I do it right? Yeah, Carol.
Is this taking into account people dying or
Yes,
just being born?
yes, that's the amount added, right. Every second, I think 5 people born, 2 die, net gain 3. Something like that, exactly. This is the net gain. I'm glad you asked that. Now, there are many of these clocks. See it? And anyway, so it's roughly 7,000. Every hour, I calculate, it's roughly 8,000 people being born. Now, let me show you something, tell you something. This has related to this. I went to the University of Denver, 1963 to 67. I had a friend, his name was Byron Newth. He lived in Holyoke, Colorado. Holyoke, Colorado had about 1,200 people. So on weekends, we used to go up there, okay, occasionally. His parents were a wheat farmer. We used to go up there, and we had a good time. A few of us would go up there and spend a weekend at his house. It was very nice, in a farm. We would drive the tractors he had and stuff. They were wheat farmers. Okay, this was 1,200 people living there. So, what did I do with all my classes? Let's say we had almost 7,000. What I would do is divide 1,200 into that, and let's see, we got about roughly 6 times. So what I'm saying is, every hour, the world produces 6 Holyoke, Colorados. See what I'm saying? Now that's a small town. Now the population is 2,500. I checked it. It hasn't grown that much, but it has 2,500 people. So since I've been in that town, and I like it. It was a small town. They had a store and a couple restaurants, and there was another town called Anango, Nebraska, which was right on the border. We would go there, and it was fun. And so I figured, why not use that town to show you how many towns are being produced the size of Holyoke, Colorado, within 1 hour that we're here. You see that? And Carol, I'm glad you asked that about the population. And by the way, I want to point out, since, let me bring this down, since we're in the population here, these are the most populous countries in the world. I want to point out that the U.S. is the 3rd in the world. And by the way, look here, this answers your question, Carol. It depends what you go. 1 birth every 8 seconds, 1 death every 11 seconds. So that's the answer there, more or less. You see that? So that does take into consideration, what's it? Here, net gain, 1 person every 14 seconds. Okay, so that's the net gain, so maybe you're right. But it's the net gain, so I don't know. So it depends what chart you read. You understand? They're not all the same. And I'm glad you asked me that, so maybe I was off a little bit compared to this, but it tells us something. And by the way, here's the US population. I don't think that's changed since we've been here. Well, there it is, very slow, see? Yeah,
Is there any correlation between childhood marriages in those other countries, China and the United States? In other words, they are the most populous.
yeah.
And so, I mean, maybe we can't blame it on child marriages if a country of Africa doesn't even show up in the first three.
Yeah, because Africa, well, let me tell you this. Africa is the least densely populated continent in the world. That's the point. They don't have that many people. But I know what you're saying. Even though they have these child marriages, you still have more people. Let me tell you, there's a statistic. The country, whenever you have a lot of girls aged 15, that's where you have a higher population, higher growth rate. Where you have more girls aged 15. I know that because we study that. At least that's what it
Well,
used to be.
it's also, if you took percentage of the population
Yeah.
that changed, you would find those very high.
Yeah,
You're actually looking at numbers
right.
that changed, and we're a much bigger population to begin with.
And by the way, percentage too, you got to realize doesn't mean much. Let me give you an example. Versus parts per million, you know? Let me explain what I mean by that. You asked a good question. See, Africa is one of the least dense, like I said, number of people per square mile, per square kilometer, you see, because they really don't have a lot of people. It's the Asian countries, India and China. India and China have 1/3 the world's population, okay? Roughly those two countries together. And you have a lot of girls age 15 and age 15. The higher the number of girls age 15, the higher the growth rate, okay? That's the cutoff point. Now, I want to point out something here. Notice that India is catching up to China. They predict in the next few years, India will have a bigger population than China. See that? And that's the fact. That's what's going on. And anyway, now, as I mentioned earlier, Nigeria is the largest country in Africa, people-wise. And anyway, so at least this gives you some statistics. I guess, I'm glad, by the way, Carol, you asked me about that. I got my statistics from somewhere else, but here we see a different one. So every 8 seconds, the population changes, and every death, 11 seconds. And, you know, I don't like to include migration. And the reason why I myself don't include it, maybe other people do, is because we're talking about the biomass on the planet. You understand? Doesn't matter where you're born, you're still born on the planet, you see? Doesn't matter what country. Does that make sense? And I know we're worried about too many people coming in and all this, and I don't even consider that a problem. But notice how slowly the U.S. population is increasing, which, you see, I don't know how accurate that is either. You go to the hospitals now, how many are being born in a day, you know? I don't know. But you add them up all together. If that's the U.S., come on, you got Chicago, you got Los Angeles, you got these other cities, you know what I'm saying? You probably have a lot more births than that. So roughly, by the way, this is about right. Did I do the calculation right? I don't know, I was just doing it quickly. I don't know, someone should check. If I want to check my calculations, yeah. I don't know. But anyway, we'll just assume. All right, so, anyway, so we see this. So, by the way, like I say, we have many different population clocks. And since I was born, by the way, I was born, let's see, when I was born, we had, the U.S. had 175,000 people, or 2.5 billion people on the earth. So, since I was born in 1945, we have 3 times that now. I'm only responsible for 2, by the way. So my parents. So anyway, are there any other questions, comments, anything? Well, I want to say thank you for coming then. Thank you. How many people are in Syria? Oh, I don't know, but about half left as refugees. That's another problem that I'm trying to remedy. By the way, if anyone's interested, you want to look at my book, I'm not trying to sell it, I just want to show you. I have 2 books here. This one's called The Earth is My Patient. It's about
Your time well. Poor Dave.
Thanks, Kai. This book is about the real cause of environmental pollution, and this one deals with climate change and disease. This one was written by myself, my best friend, and a doctor who teaches here, Jacob Yevon. He's the expert. Anyway.